Hi guys. Oh, the other day I was cruising Craigslist and I found this on there. It's a Graybar 310 coffin style radio. It's a TRF radio. Um, it is actually nothing more than a Radiola 18 radio and a cabinet that Graybar had purchased to put the radio in. There were several radios built this way that used the RCA 18 Radiola 18 chassis. I know a few of them. I know Friedman had one made. I don't remember what model it was. There's the Brunswick 5KR. Of course, RCA had their version, which was it's their radio. All basically the same cabinet design, a coffin style, but the cabinets were all different because the companies would use their own cabinet manufacturers, whoever they went out to, and of course Graybar. So the cabinets may look slightly different, different trim around the edges, different discussions and the like and stuff, but it's just a Radiola 18 chassis and power supply unit in it. When I got the radio, it had all but one tube in it. All the globes were in the radio. All it was missing was the audio output tube. It's a 71A, so I had to grab one that I had and put in it. Everything in here that was in the radio, except for one tube, is RCA Radiotron tubes. The detector tube, the 27, is a Cunningham, but I believe it actually might have been original, or at least from the period. Now, when I got the radio, there was quite a bit of dust. You can still see some of the dirt right up in here. I haven't cleaned off yet. I did decide, I pulled the tubes out and checked them. They all checked really good. Where the 71 was sitting, the dust over the socket was pretty much exactly the same amount of dust that was on the chassis. So it hadn't had a 71A tube in here for quite many years. It had been missing for quite a few years, and I've got a theory about what happened to it. I'll get to in a minute, because when I pulled all the rest of these tubes out to test them and clean them up, where the tube actually set, that part of the socket was just clean as can be. I mean, it looked like brand new. There had not been no dust underneath like the tubes had been left out any length of time. Now, the basic theory that I have, what happened to 71, was that at some point in time this radio was worked on, and you got the RCA Radiotron UX280, the 80 rectifier tube, but it also has a sticker on it, and from a company there in Nebraska, and evidently worked on radios and sold some radios and tubes. Evidently tongue saw radio tubes they obviously sold. This is a tag that they put on there when they tested the tube to check it when they was working on the radio, and it's marked good. You got medium and then weak. In 1937, the actual date was like 5/10/1937. So it was either May 10th or October 5th, one or the other, depending on which way they wrote the date out, in 1937. So my theory about this is that the original owner of the radio probably had the complaint, he probably brought the radio in to have it worked on and had the complaint of, oh, that's part of the tag, of the, it not producing any sound at all. You know, maybe the dial light came on, but that was it. He might have looked inside and seen some of the tubes lighting up, the ones he could see, but he just couldn't get nothing out of it. So my guess is when he took it in to have it worked on, they figured that it was either one or two things. Either the rectifier tube went out or something happened to the power supply and he didn't have B+, or also possibly that the other possibility is the audio output. You know, the 71A might have quit on them. So they started at this end, they checked the tube tested good, they probably pulled the cover off here where the two connect on, did a measurement of voltage, found they had voltage. Probably decided that we won't really mess with these at this point, we'll come down here and check the audio output tube, and they probably found it bad. And being it was 1937, still in the Depression, and money was still tight, the owner probably, and since it's a TRF radio, and it was at least 5 years really basically out of date for the most part, actually more years than that, but you know, by 1937 everybody was making super heterodyne radios, so they probably just chose, you know, even though the probably wasn't going to cost a lot of money for a new tube and the diagnosis and the labor of that, they probably chose not to fix the radio. So most likely the tube was probably still out of the radio when he gave it back to the owner, and that's why it had so much dust on the socket, pretty much the same as the chassis, and why the tube was missing. So the cabinet's not in too bad a shape. You know, some of the finish is kind of thinning. There's some loss right along through here. The top, I don't know if I can get it on the camera, but there's just a little bit of veneer separation right here. If you can see me pushing up and down on it. Just a little small area that needs to be glued back down. That was the only spot on the top. A little bit of looseness in the back in one small corner. Other than that, it just needs a good cleaning and everything. So the Craigslist listing of it was that they didn't show a picture, didn't have a picture of it, but they said that they didn't have a speaker for it, so they didn't know if the radio actually worked or not, but they know that the tubes would light up. So that might have been the case. I don't know if he actually did plug it in. If he did, he was being pretty unsafe because the cord was not in the best of condition. But in any case, that's what he claimed. So I took his word for it. And being that there's not a whole lot of capacitors that can really go bad, there's a capacitor block here. A lot of times these will get leaky, but generally they're not, you know, they don't generally short too badly. And so what I thought I would do, and I did, was try it out. Now the volume control does work, but it's dirty. You know, it's a little noisy. So we'll let her warm up here, and of course you can see the 27 lit up, and if we look down in there you can probably see the 171 lit up and the 80 rectifier lit up. But it takes a little time for it to warm up, and
a car, a little bit of credit card debt. I've got no emergency fund, and I've got a house I owe about 150, and I've had a realtor tell me it's worth about 190. Shit.
Does anybody understand the syringe reference? Do you know one or a time?
When you sign up for a new Share Connect plan, share your home phones, mobile hotspots, and modems. Share more and
So I think clean, sharp, bloody, and pretty hostile in my context. Tyler, can
That all of this sympathy and all of this welfare and the promotion from the requirements of civilization, not just.
So the radio does work as it sits. Now I'm going to replace the caps that's in here, although this box is not really getting any warmth to it, but I'm sure they're leaky. There's also another box underneath the chassis that holds 4 capacitors in it, 0.5s, and I'm pretty sure that they're not doing the best in the world. So I will be, replacing those, and a lot of the rest of it will just be mostly cleaning, I believe. I'm not sure the absolute condition of things, but I'm pretty sure that from the looks on the outside here and places I could see, I did pull the back off so I could look underneath at least the tuner chassis, and everything looked good there. And the radio, the fact it will play. I'm sure after I replace the capacitors and things of this nature and get that volume control cleaned up some and stuff, that the thing will play better even yet. But it's not doing too bad for being a radio from around 1928, and I really don't think there's been much work done to it. The one thing that could very well be possible, the 27 had been replaced at one time, but it would have been replaced early on in the radio's life, since it's a globe of the period, and it's a Cunningham. It's not unusual to find sometimes some RCA equipment having Cunningham tubes in it, because Cunningham and RCA, prior to their merger in 1931, late 31, they had signed an agreement between them that allowed them to put their tubes in, allow Cunningham put tubes in RCA equipment, but also allowed Cunningham to also manufacture tubes at times when RCA was running low on ability to produce enough tubes. You got to realize by the late 1920s, radio was exploding, and these companies were getting really caught with their pants down about not having enough manufacturing to, it couldn't keep up with the demand. So RCA and Cunningham had signed an agreement back in 1926 to work with each other on keeping a good supply of tubes and stuff. So and then 1931 they went ahead and merged. That's how come if you look up tube manuals, if you look at like the number 10 on RCA, and I think it's about the same number in Cunningham, which is some of the earliest tube manuals. The RCA calls theirs R10, but the number 11, which was produced in 1932, was RC11. 10 was R for just RCA, and then in 1932 when they produced the RCA, or RC11, which stood for, the R was RCA, C was Cunningham, and it was a pure merger. The two companies retained themselves as they are, and just worked underneath the same corporate management, but they retained their names and stuff. In any case, I'm going to go ahead and get this thing all disconnected, get the speaker disconnected and everything, and when I come back I'll have the get the chassis out. I'll have them out so we can look them over and go from there. Now, as a point to make, this is not like I'm stopping on the TV or any of that. Those videos, in fact the next video will be back on the Admiral TV. I'll be just kind of hopscotching back and forth between the restoration of this and continuing with the TV. So those that's been really interested in the Admiral TV and that series, it will continue. There will be a video coming up fairly soon, the next video in the series. So, and it will show the TV actually in operation. It is effectively finished, other than alignment of the IFs and stuff, and as well as getting the getting a test pattern on there and getting the picture taken care of. The linearity, or the width and height and linearity of everything. So anyway, when you get back here, you'll have this the chassis out of the unit. Okay, got the chassis out. This is what they call the socket powered unit, or just power supply. Transformer. You have two chokes in here they call the reactor unit. There's another choke and 3 caps in here. 2 of the caps for the power supply. The other cap is to keep the DC off the speaker. And they're in this. Of course, your 80 rectifier goes here. There's a tag that was on this. It was broke, and it's a factory original tag. The socket power unit -30, number 82731. Hook onto that. So it just fell off, and it was just laying down beside here. These wires hook from the tuner to right onto these connections here. There's also 2 extra wires that goes to the dial light, and then this would go over top of those connections, and then this piece slid over top of that. Let's just go down here, and then that's just slid over top of that. The little deal here is for protection of the switch. Flip this way, it's for 120 volt operation, and this way for 110 volt operation. It was in this position. This holds it that way. If you have it the other way, it'll keep it that way when this is on place. So let's flip first the power supply. This is the remains of the power cord. I had cut it off and hooked a temporary onto it. Of course, the power switch comes out the side of the chassis and goes out to the front. And this is the basic bottom of it. Power switch hooks into here. One side of the power switch hooks to one side of the cord. The black colored wire, and then the other side feeds back through here up to this switch, which is the switch that switches between whether you got 120 or 110 line voltage. And of course, off of it, it feeds back to the primary of the transformer. The other side of the power cord hooks here, which is the other side of the primary. Going back to the power transformer. The resistors here are bias resistors that hook into the filament, or since it's directly heated cathodes on the 26s, it would be the cathodes or the filaments. These three here they go across the filament windings, directly across, and then they're centered off. They go to, well, two of them will go to the two biasing resistors. The third one goes directly to ground. It's for the 27. The 27 is actually indirectly heated, but they always felt that the way the filament's in there, that it could actually still cause some hum. So one way to get rid of hum is you put a resistor across the winding, the filament winding, and you take off as close to center as possible, or right dead center off that resistor, and take that to ground. That splits the phasing up. It creates a split phasing in that filament winding that cancels itself, so you don't hear a hum. The rest of this is just, you got the well, where the filter caps are located is inside this box. They'll have to come off. This goes out to the speaker. This is what they call the reactor box, which is just, there's a couple chokes in there. And then of course the transformer, the two different sides of it. So that basically makes up for this part of the chassis. One point, I'm not the only one that ever had anything dealings with this. There's other YouTube videos on here. If you want to see a Brunswick 5KR, go over B. Anderson TV's channel, and go to, once you get to his page, his channel, go to playlist, and you'll find he's got a playlist of it, of the Brunswick 5KR restoration, 15 videos. He had a real rough time with his. His was badly rusted. Had a lot of moisture that it endured. So he ended up, all four screws holding the power unit in was rusted solid, and they all broke off. They were pretty much rusted through. So he showed what he had to do to get those taken care of. They reside with a riveted brass nut. The nut sits on here, and then it had a collar on it, and it's riveted into the metal. That way you can just screw the screw in and out. You don't have to worry about a nut moving on you. Yeah, well, he had to cut those out and redo all that, and he did a great job. He spent a lot of hours, a lot of days on getting that rust off and getting it cleaned up and getting everything done. So check out his video series. You'll see the differences between the two cabinets of the Graybar versus the Brunswick, but the chassis are identical. Now moving on to the tuner chassis. This is basically it right here. You've seen the top of it somewhat before when the tubes were in it. So it starts at this end and feeds through. This is your 3 RF tuned RF amplifiers, all 26s. Feeds into the detector. You get your first audio, which is an R26. The detector is 27, and then the output is the 171A tube. This little thing here on the tuning is on a tuning condenser. I mean, a condenser is a condenser, and on a tuning condenser, no difference. Is you got one plate. You know, you got two plates, one on one side of your capacitor and one on the other side of your capacitor, and they're insulated from each other, in this case by air. Other cases can be paper, can be any number of different materials. But these stators are fixed part of the tuning condenser, goes to here. They're hooked onto these 3 wires for each of the 3 sections. But you also have to hook this rotor. which makes up the other side of your capacitor. It has to hook to something. Well, generally it goes to ground, and that's what it's doing. And what they did was they hooked a little wire, kind of spring-loaded wire, soldered it onto the shaft, and ran around hooked here. More modern day tuning condensers have little forks that fit in at each section. Usually in the center between the two sections there's a separation plate, and on each side there'll be these little brass forks that slide in there, and there'll be a cutout on the shaft that they slide into, and that's how they get the ground. Otherwise you're relying on the bearing points to get ground. You can't do that because it's fine when it's not moving for the most part, but the minute you start moving it, you break your ground. So we'll go ahead and flip this over, hopefully staying in the video. Let me get something to kind of prop that a little bit, so it'll in there, and we'll kind of go over some of this. Alright, here's your coils that goes with the tuning condenser, making up the tank circuit. And like I said one time on a previous video working with a TRF radio, or some of it, that if you have zero shielding, which obviously there's none, these coils have to be at 90 degrees to each other. So this one is moving up and down like this, which is 90 degrees to this one going this direction, and then this one is 90 degrees to this one. That way they don't get interference. The least amount of magnetic field can ever cut anything by doing it this way. Otherwise you have to have some sort of shielding, which they opted out of. Now we move over here. The big box here is the interstage audio transformers. There's one that connects the detector tube output, the plate of the detector tube, the 27, to the grid of the first audio, which is 26. And then the next one is used for connecting the plate of the 26 to the grid of the 171A. Now there's no audio output tube because these old radios like this generally used high impedance speakers. When you use a high impedance speaker, the impedance of the speaker, of its basic voice coil or voice coil mechanism, that coil, the impedance of it is such that it makes a good load for the output tube, and also matches the impedances between the two. So you don't need an audio output transformer. But to couple the three tubes together, they used two transformers, which was typical back in the day to use interstage audio transformers, and that's what's inside the box. And obviously it works. There's no use of testing it. It's obvious that it is doing something because it produced sound. Here's where those 4.5 microfarad caps are. Two of them are for the decoupling on the filament lines going to the 26s, and then two of them are plate decoupling caps. Goes on the plate, basically allowing some filterization of the plate on the detector. This little cap here is used to basically, it's only alignment, but there's no actual alignment. What this does is actually adjusts, since we've got three RF sections and three tune sections here, we want to make sure that everybody is operating pretty much such that they're all operating in unison. And basically that's just a feedback cap in the first stage to work that you can adjust it. It basically feeds off of a coil, feeding back some of the plate back into a coil that goes into the grid of the second RF tube, and allows to get compensation between all three stages. It's actually in the center, so you're basically using that center to compensate all three stages. It's usually something that you set once for gain, and get it set, and you don't want to bother it again unless there's an absolute need or you can prove a reason to bother it. In fact, there was a piece of tape or glued paper over the hole, because it comes up, you get to it through a hole from the tuner side of the tuning condenser. You stick a screwdriver down there and adjust it. Not much more else to talk about. Again, you got the coils. There's two caps on each of these coils, and then there's 3 more capacitors in here. This resistor here and one of those caps make up the grid leak circuit for the detector tube. Since it's a grid leak detector, this should be, somewhere around 5 megs. It can be less than that. 27 go anywhere from 1 to 10 megs for the size of the resistor for its grid leak. And then you always have a capacitor, because actually the way it's working is the resistor creates the drop voltage, which then actually charges up the cap when the signal goes the other way. The time constant between this and the cap is such that when the signal goes the other way that would normally discharge the cap, it's slow enough that it can't fully discharge it. So then when it goes back to the next swing, it charges more until that cap gets to a certain level of charge, which is what basically will be the bias needed for the detector tube. And then at that spot it stops charging anymore. Let's see. These are these are plate load resistors for the detector as well. One goes to ground. One is a feed that hooks into one of the coils, the primary and of the audio, and then feeds the plate of the detector. And of course you got the variable resistor here, the potentiometer for adjusting volume, which basically what you're doing is you're adjusting the signal strength of the antenna. Turn it one direction all the way down, you're basically sending the grid of the first tube up here is actually to ground, because the wiper here hooks right directly to the grid of that tube. And you got the maximum resistance, which is I think about 2K or something like that, between that and the antenna. When you turn it full on the other way, then you have no resistance to the antenna. The antenna is pretty well zero resistance directly hooked to the grid, so you get the maximum signal. So basically you're adjusting the volume by adjusting how much signal gets into the radio and goes through. So you can kind of think about it like on a radio that going beyond the limit of the AVC, you go from a real weak station on a much newer radio that you have to crank the volume up to here, and then you tune it through and you hit a local super strong station. Even the AVC can't keep up with that, and it's going to blare right in. So it's kind of similar to that, except that's how we're controlling volume. So the audio is full on. You just adjust the volume by adjusting how much radio signal from the airways gets to the first 26 tube. If you watch Bob's videos, in his Brunswick, this wire was actually cut This is a little feedback loop which feeds back into the circuitry. It's feeding back into the grid circuit of the detector. It's basically kind of pulling some of that signal to ground. And he found that his actually worked better with a cut. He was having a hard time. He couldn't even get the upper frequency stations. Once he cut it, he could. This one's still attached, and it seems to still be operational. There's a possibility cutting it, it might actually improve it. Is not really known for sure unless I actually cut it. At this point, I'm not going to touch it. I'll wait until I get these caps replaced and the power supply caps. The power supply caps are leaking. They're going to draw down a little bit of that B+, so not enough B+ are getting to all the circuitry, so that would reduce the gain. These guys are leaking a little bit. That's going to reduce some gain too. So get everything else that needs to be fixed and taken care of, and then we'll see how it sounds and concern ourselves with this little gimmick here. The engineers saw fit to put this in. It's not in the schematic, which tells me this is something after they actually built the radio up in a prototype that they found helped the radio perform better, and it just never made it in the schematic. So that's about it. The wiring is pretty good in this, and in fact most of the colors actually show up pretty good on both this and the socket power unit. Radio's in pretty good shape, and so I think the first thing I'll do is I'll set this off to the side and get this out and get the wax melted out of it, and get them caps replaced. There's 3 caps in there, 1 microfarad caps and then a 0.5 microfarad cap. Get them in there and get that sealed back up and remounted. I will go ahead and check the resistances on these wire wound resistors, power resistors, but they're wire wound, they generally don't drift, so whatever they are is probably pretty much what they are, unless they would happen to short out a wire to one of the wires to each other, and one of the windings would short out, which is very unlikely, or they would open, is the 2 scenarios that would cause problems. Put a new power cord on and put a fuse in it. Then we'll get to getting this unmounted. I'll check the resistance of these resistors and get this unmounted, get the caps out of it, and get the new replacements in there. I do want to clean up the volume control. It's scratchy. Bob had to deal with one on his. It was actually open at one end, and at that time I'll talk a little more about this. But this one here seems to be not enough really spring tension on the wiper. You don't want too much because it can be hard on the wires, but you want enough that it makes good contact. Try cleaning it first and see if that helps. If it's still having a little troubles at some places, you can pull the shaft out and bend that just a little bit to give it just a teeny bit more tension. You don't want too much. Too much, these are very fine wires, so too much it can wear them out unduly quickly, and of course then they open. And then just basically cleaning. I don't think there's really a whole lot of there's no corrosion that I can see, and really all it really needs is just clean the dirt off, and I think it'll be good to go. I might check into the compensator adjustment and see if it needs a little fine tuning once I get the caps replaced and stuff. But I really don't think there'll be a whole lot more to do to it. I'm not really too concerned about these style caps here. There's one here and there's one, I think, underneath on this side here, and there's one here, and one down underneath. These are early form of mica, but they're not silver mica, so there's no silver corrosion. These use usually brass or copper plates, and generally, as long as you don't see no green on them, they're perfectly fine. Whatever capacitance they check, if you was to check it, was what they were when they were, as long as there's no corrosion, will be the capacitance they were when they put it in the radio. They do not drift unless they get corroded, and then I'll change their capacitance. So I think I'm going to leave off right here. I'll of course clean up the tuner and lube it up and get it as working as nicely as possible, and we'll continue on with it on the next video coming up after in a day or two. We'll be back on the TV. I'll show it actually in operation, and we'll talk about continue talking our comparison to radio, the various circuits. Probably actually we'll finish up that part of it as far as the comparison goes, because it's going fairly quickly, and then continuing in that the next video after that, then we'll talk about the sync circuits, and we'll start on those in depth and go from there. So thanks for watching, guys, and I thank my new subscribers. If you like this video, give it a big thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and you just ran across this video or some of my other videos, go ahead and subscribe. I do a lot of videos both on theory and also working on vintage electronic equipment of all different ages and different types. And thank you for your comments, and I guess I'll see you guys on the next video. Again, it'll be on the next one in a day, next day or two. We'll be back on the Admiral TV. Oh, as a footnote to this, I was going to put it in the description, but I think sometimes not everybody reads the description. But what I paid for this radio, I found it on Craigslist. It was 120 miles away. I live in southeast Iowa, and it was up in a town called Ames, Iowa, is where I used to live. But in any case, it was up there, and in the Craigslist they did not have a picture of it. They listed what it was and listed that they plugged it in. They don't know if it operates because they did not have a speaker, but they did notice the tubes light up. And then the last thing they said in there, that they would give it away free to a collector. If you're a collector, you can have it free. So I quickly looked up the Graybar. I wasn't really familiar with the radio. Looked it up and found pictures of it and found information what it was. And so I contacted the guy. It was by Craigslist email, and surprising enough, he actually answered me back, and I ended up going to get it. So the radio only cost me actually only just the gas to go up and back and get it. So I thought I'd add that little footnote in there because I forgot to tell you about it. So it's about the best price. I like sometimes free radios. A lot of times they're usually pretty much basket cases, but this one is not too bad a shape. So again, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.